The supermoon sent me into labor, so let's talk about it. So I'm about to give birth to my second child in a few weeks, and I realized that I never shared the birth story of my first child. I fell pregnant with Donovan back in 2022. I found out on Christmas 2022, and I was pregnant all of 2023. This being my first pregnancy, obviously I was scared. I had no idea what to expect, and I was doing all the research. My plan was to do it unmedicated, and I was taking hypnobirthing classes with Andy. We were going there every week for I think about 6 weeks towards the end of my pregnancy. It helps you properly prepare your mind and your spirit and your soul to give birth. I love the classes. They were great. I learned so much. Me and Andy practiced everything they told us to practice. I was fully mentally and emotionally ready to give birth unmedicated and naturally. However, when I went to my 36-week appointment and they did the growth ultrasound, we realized that Donovan was definitely not where he should be. His head was up here in my ribs and he was sitting behind completely breech. And not only was he breech, but he was measuring huge. He was measuring about 2 weeks ahead. I think that they were projecting him to be 10 pounds if I went full term, which obviously was shocking. However, Andy was a big fat baby when he was born, so those genetics, I guess, carried on to Donovan. But since he was breech, I got the devastating news at the time that I was going to be having a C-section if he did not flip. And I had to schedule that around 39 weeks. So I had 3 weeks to try everything in my power to get him to flip. I was trying everything I could to make this baby flip because obviously I just went through all these classes with hypnobirthing. I already was so mentally prepared to do it naturally. Now I was coming to terms with the fact that I was going to undergo surgery and completely threw that whole birth plan out the window. However, the doctor did let me know they had a procedure called the ECV procedure where they try and manually, from the outside of your stomach, try and flip the baby around. And it was only like less than, I think, 30% effective. Desperate as ever, having no idea, never been through this. I was torn on what to do. I didn't know if I wanted to go through that, if it wasn't going to work. But like I said, I was really ready to have a natural birth. So at this point, I was ready to try anything. So we scheduled the ECV procedure to happen at 38 weeks as like a final last ditch effort to avoid a C-section. I actually had to go into labor and delivery in case it sent me into labor because I was so close. And 2 men came in and stood over me. Andy was there and they pushed with so much pressure, trying to get him to move from one end to the other, like manually move him. He moved halfway and then boing, just flipped right back to where he was and absolutely was not having it. It was very uncomfortable, very traumatic, and I do not recommend ever doing that. So at this point, I knew that I was going to have a C-section, and unfortunately, I had to mourn the birth plan that I had set in my head. When I found out Donovan was breech, I probably cried and was so upset for about a week. I was due September 4th with Donovan, and I scheduled the C-section for September 1st because I thought to myself, well, at least I get to pick your birthday now, Donovan. So I thought 9/1/2/3 was such a cute birthday. So after I finally accepted that the C-section was happening, his birthday was going to be on the 1st of September, we were fully prepared for it. There was a massive super blue moon on August 30th through the 31st. This moon was a full moon, a super moon, and a blue moon all in one. So it was like the biggest, craziest super moon of the year. And being the little Cancer that I am, I went outside. We were living in an apartment at the time. I went to the top of my parking garage. It was like 10:30 at night. The moon was at full capacity. And I lifted up my shirt, exposed my bare belly to the moon, and rubbed it under the moon for like 10 minutes. My goal was to just bless my son with the new beginnings and the powers of the moon. So anyway, I went to bed that night. Everything was completely normal. Like I said before, our C-section was scheduled for the morning of September 1st. I went to bed on the night of August 30th after rubbing my belly under the supermoon. And then at about 4 hours later at 2 a.m., I woke up to a bunch of pressure down there, kind of like I had to go number 2. So I went to the bathroom and probably sat on the toilet for like 20 minutes, did my thing, and then got back into bed and tried going back to sleep, but I could not. I was having a bunch of Braxton Hicks weeks leading up to this, so I was kind of feeling that sensation, but it started getting a little bit crampy and painful. These ones started to feel a little bit more intense, and they were definitely more regular, and something was definitely different. So I pulled out my phone and I started to time them, and I probably sat in bed for a good hour because I knew Andy had to wake up at 3:30, and I didn't want to just wake him for nothing because I knew he had to go to work at 4 a.m. So I was just sitting there for like an hour timing these contractions, and they were like going from 8 minutes apart to like 5 minutes apart. And at this point, I was like, okay, something is definitely up. I still was so nervous that I was gonna wake Andy up for no reason. So right when his alarm went off at like 3 in the morning, the moment it went off, I was like, something's wrong. He woke up, he was like, what? I told him, I think I'm going into labor right now. I've been timing my little contractions and they are getting closer and closer and definitely very consistent. So he got up and he's like, okay, we're doing this. So I got up, we called our parents. It was like 3 a.m., 3:30 at this point. I just started getting ready. I got in the shower, I did my makeup, I got completely ready, and we got in the car and we went to the hospital around 5:30. It's a running joke in our family that Donovan has been stubborn since the day one. He decided he did not want to come on September 1st and that he was going to come when he wanted to and choose his own birthday. He is a double Virgo, so it tracks. So we got to the hospital at around 5:30, I think it was, or 5:40. Since I was scheduled to go into a C-section the following day, my doctor was not even there at the hospital when I came in. So it was kind of like an emergency C-section. They went and checked how dilated I was. They said I was in active labor, I was 4 centimeters dilated, and they needed to put me back into the operating room ASAP. I was nervous. I didn't really know what to expect. I was ready, I'll tell you that. Contractions were intense, but like I said, I went through hypnobirthing classes, so I think that majorly helped with how I breathed through them and how I handled the pain, because it wasn't that bad for me, at least yet. I was able to talk, I was able to breathe, I wasn't in too much pain. But they sat me on the table, the operating table, and I think it was a big needle. They put it in my back to numb me completely. I swore I felt like my water broke then on the table. I felt like a gush of liquid. And then they started going and they were just so casual. I remember sitting there and they were talking about their weekend plans, and to me I was like, wow, this is just like another day for them. Obviously it was super casual. However, I started to get this overwhelming feeling of nausea, and the last thing I wanted to do was throw up. I looked at my anesthesiologist and I was like, listen dude, I feel like I'm gonna throw up right now, like please help me, please give me medication. So he ended up giving me, I think, like anti-nausea, anti-throw-up medication, and it immediately kind of pushed it back down. Donovan came out. He was perfectly healthy, perfectly ready to go. Huge baby. He ended up being 9 pounds 7 ounces, like I said before. Huge baby. Andy went and took pictures of him and watched them measure him. I was not feeling the best, and at this point the doctors had kind of stopped their casual conversations. They took Donovan, and I just told Andy, go with Donovan, go be with him. I'll wait here for them to stitch me back up. Apparently I was losing a lot of blood and I had no idea. And the feeling I was feeling was like almost like I was dying, I could only describe it as. And I'm not trying to scare anyone that has a C-section coming up, because C-sections go great all the time. And this is why I was skeptical on sharing this part of my birth story. But apparently I had thick mucus veins down there is what my doctor would describe it as, which means I was bleeding a lot more. I ended up losing, I think, almost a third of my blood, and I was white as a ghost afterwards. I finally got to see Donovan around 45 minutes later, and I remember just being so kind of out of it, not myself for probably the first day to 2 days. I was having anxiety attacks. I was like no color in my skin. They had to watch my red blood cell count, or it was at a super low level. They're gonna have to do a blood transfusion, or I was gonna have to try and get my red blood cell count back up naturally. So that was being closely monitored for a good 2 days. Like, my dad was there and he was demanding answers. Andy was demanding answers. I was demanding answers, and the hospital couldn't really give me a good answer as to why I lost all my blood in that moment. Like I said, I found out later from my doctor when I questioned the crap out of her, and she kind of explained it to me. My dad was scared, and my dad doesn't get scared, so you know when my dad's anxious that something's real. He was telling them absolutely no blood transfusions. We're gonna try and do this ourselves. Like, get her some steak. He would bring me like red meat. I was just not wanting to eat anything in those first day to 2 days. My red blood cell count went back up to normal after a few days. I was feeling better. The anxiety attacks were going away, but The problem with it was because of the blood loss, I kind of associate that with how hard the recovery was. It was kind of brutal for me. The problem was I wanted to do everything, but because of the C-section, I just could not. And so I was sometimes trying to overwork myself, and it would like regress me a bit. One thing they teach you in hypnobirthing classes is to not listen or really talk about a negative birth story. I wouldn't exactly say it was negative. It just was not the plan I envisioned for myself. And I definitely did not want to bleed so much. Now we fast forward and I'm pregnant again. And of course, my doctor asked if I plan to do a C-section or what my plan is. And because of what happened with Donovan's C-section, it does scare me a little to go through that again. However, if you've had a C-section before, they automatically say, okay, you can just have a C-section again, no problem. But she did tell me I was a good candidate for a VBAC, and I had the option, and I sat there for a few weeks trying to decide. With the extensive recovery period for a C-section and just the fact that it's major surgery, I do not want to go through that again while also having to go through postpartum and take care of a toddler. It sounds like an absolute nightmare to me. So our plan is, if I do end up going full term, I do have a C-section scheduled for 40 weeks and 4 days. If I end up going into labor naturally, we're just going to try our best for a VBAC and doing it that way. I haven't exactly decided if I want to do it unmedicated or with the epidural yet. I guess that'll be kind of like a day of kind of thing. So yep, that's my birth story with Donovan and my current birth plan with this one. Let's hope that baby girl does not want to go all the way till 40 weeks, because I definitely do not want to have another C-section, and I'm going to try my best to avoid that. Like I said, nothing's really in your control. The baby does what the baby wants to do. I'm just going to try my best to encourage her to come earlier. I'm so excited to meet her. I can't believe we're down to the last few weeks. It feels like this pregnancy just flew by for me, which is, I guess, better than dragging on. Like I said, now it is go time. Once I hit 37 weeks, I am go, trying what I can to get this little girl out. But we'll see. Bye.